Wonderful.
Oh, so since I'm going to use a presentation, you'll just screen share for me? Or how do you want to do that?
Oh, you're gonna use presentation. Let me make you as a
Presenter? Or however that
co-host.
works?
You have to be a co-host.
Okay.
Because for security purposes, otherwise people making trouble. Let me see.
Yeah.
Where did you go? Here. Okay, so you are a co-host. You can share screen.
Okay.
Yeah, so any questions can only go to co-host. And then if you see any question coming to you, you can read it to us. But we ask them to send it to Dolly, our team member, so then so she can post to us.
Do I need to admit people in the waiting room as well?
Oh, you don't have to. No.
Okay, good.
We actually make them wait a little bit until 5. Oh, it's 5:20. Let's let them in. Okay. I'm gonna let everybody in right now.
Okay.
How do you say your last name again, James?
Good
I'm
luck.
sorry?
It's Callejas, but Coco, I watched your video. I liked it. And you did say my last name correctly.
I am so sorry. I know I messed up a couple of times.
You didn't. I thought you did an excellent job.
You probably thought you saw my hesitation.
Can I play it?
Yes, please. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a good job. I watched the entire video.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Happy New Year. Regardless of how good of a year 2020 was, we should all strive to make 2021 better. I like New Year's because all new things make me happy. New clothes, new friends, new investments, new constructions, and of course, new seminars full of learning opportunities. Welcome to Investors Medley, a fresh new series of Tuesday afternoon networking. We're now live on YouTube, Facebook, 一直播, TikTok, and Weibo. Hi, my name is Coco T.A.N. I'm a realtor in the San Francisco Bay Area with Keller Realty. One of my New Year's resolutions is to increase the quality and quantity of my T.A.N. Tuesday afternoon networking live streams and YouTube channel. You can help me by subscribing and sending me questions, comments, and suggestions for new topics. Here is my QR code for my YouTube channel. You can also scan this WeChat code to add me as a friend and join my live stream group. That's where I post information about off-market listings and also about upcoming seminars. All right, let's waste no time to get to this educational part of our seminar. Our first session of the first series of the new year is Gains Without Pains. This is all about taking advantage of Section 1031 exchanges. If you joined our meeting early and saw the trivia questions, then you may have noticed that there were some questions about 1031 exchanges. Basically, when you sell an investment property, you have to pay capital gains taxes on the money you make. However, you can defer those taxes by reinvesting the money to buy another investment property. This is known as a 1031 exchange, swapping one investment property for another in the way that allows capital gains taxes to be deferred. However, it is not as simple as it sounds. The IRS has many rules that you must follow. The law includes definitions, limitations, tax implications, and timeframes. Here to shed some light on this topic is our expert, James Callejas. James is a returning guest. Some of you may remember how awesome he was as a public speaker and education. He is the Vice President of National Accounts with Investment Property Exchange Services, Inc. He is responsible for business cultivation and development nationwide. James has conducted thousands of seminars on different topics related to real estate, taxes, estate planning, and personal property. He teaches continuing legal education and continuing professional education to attorneys and CPAs. Last time, at our Tuesday afternoon networking, he gave us a sneak peek of today's presentation. He said that the 1031 exchange is one of the greatest wealth building tools that exists, and that if you know how to use it, you can use it to increase your business significantly and even turn your real estate portfolio into a gold mine. Those are some strong words, and we have a lot of viewers here because of that powerful statement from James. I hope he can deliver on his promise. Everybody give an epic welcome to James Callejas. Hi, James.
Hi, Coco. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you for joining us today. So let's get started with your speech tonight.
Yeah, happy to get started. I keep looking down because I know that the runoff is going in Georgia right now. And it looks like the Democrats are in the lead with about 46% of the vote coming through on both candidates. And it's about 54 to 46% on both candidates going for the Senate runoff in Georgia right now. And the reason why that is important, because if the Democrats win, they have control of the Senate, which could make things easier to change. And if the Republicans win one of those seats, then it'll be difficult for things to be changed in the future. And I think that impacts all the real estate investors, because Biden has mentioned a few things that he may consider changing in the future. So I am curious to see how that rolls out throughout the next couple of hours. Maybe by today, at the end of this session, I can give you more of an update on that. I'm sure others are checking as well, just to see how that goes. But
that's great. We'd love to hear about the updates, not just the 1031 basics, right? You're going to cover the basics as well as all the.
I'm going to cover the basics. I'm going to cover everything, but that's something that could impact the 1031 exchange, as well as tax brackets, as well as other things that encompass real estate. And since this is a real estate class, I think it's important that we stay in tune with what's going on as well. With that, I wanted to give a bunch of different insights on the 1031 exchange, as well as an update on how the market was for 2020 and what we project for 2021. I'm going to bring up a presentation and share it. And here we go. Okay, so this is just my basic contact information. I've been doing 1031 exchanges since 1998, so this will be my 23rd year in the 1031 industry. I've seen a lot of different things change. I've seen the good times, the bad times. I got to tell you, in 2005, the numbers were so insane that we were just getting too many exchanges to handle. It was just that busy. And then in 2010, I think our best month, and that was December in 2010, we may have done 30 exchanges in all of Northern California. When you see a market that fluctuates, when you see a lot of short sales and foreclosures, you don't see that many 1031 exchanges. The good news is 2011, 12 started to see an increase in business, and everything has gone up since then in terms of 1031 activity. So what I want to do today is explain what a 1031 exchange is, why people do 1031 exchanges, how you can build a tremendous amount of wealth with the 1031 exchange, the different rules and guidelines that you need to follow, some of the things you may not be aware of in the 1031 exchange, and perhaps towards the end of the class, we'll see if we're getting closer to a Democratic or Republican victory on the runoff that we're having in Georgia. So again, here's my contact information. Anybody who has questions on the 1031 exchange, feel free to reach out to me via phone, via email, via text, via whatever. I'm happy to help. And with that, let's get rolling. Here are a couple of websites that you may want to jot down. I feel that these are really important websites. We had the coronavirus and we had the fires that impacted all of us when it came to the coronavirus. And the fires, a lot of us in Northern California, and what it did in terms of the 1031 exchange is it provided extensions on some of the timeframes that exist in a 1031 exchange. And some people just want to be on top of it all the time. They can't wait to call me the next day. They can't wait for me to return their call. And I understand that because it may have impacted your 1031 exchange. This first website, the IRS homepage, you can look at all the different tax forms. You can look at recent publications, but you can also go there to see if there's any disaster relief available or if it has impacted you. And a lot of people since COVID hit have asked me, and I got to tell you, back in March, we were waiting and people saying, when's it going to happen? I said, I don't know, but I check the website as often as possible to see when something is going to hit. And then when it did, it's released there first. And then we take it, we incorporate it within our whole database and let everyone know exactly what happened. But if you're that kind of person that likes to be on top of things, that is a very good website. Second website is our website, ipx1031.com. I think this one's very important as well, because quite often I have people that call me and say, hey, I Googled this, James, and this is what it says on the 1031 exchange. I looked on the internet, I heard from a friend, I talked to a realtor, I talked to an attorney, I talked to a CPA. All of those resources sometimes can be good, but a lot of the time they're not up to date and there is some information that may not be correct. Anything that is on our website is the most current. There are most PDFs out. There are many PDFs out there for most subject matter. If you want something more in depth, like case studies, private letter rulings, revenue procedure, or anything of that nature, I will have access to that and I can give you that type of information as well. So these are the websites. My contact information that I shared with you in the beginning is where you can get a more in-depth one-on-one consultation and perhaps more literature that you can use when making a decision when you have a 1031 exchange scenario that may need that type of support. Real quickly, here's the definition on 1031 exchange. I'm not going to read it to you because everybody knows how to read, but this is what they have in terms of the Internal Revenue Code. I like the simple things. I like it to keep it very simple so we all understand. In my opinion, here's what a 1031 exchange is. It's where you are selling and buying investment property. And if you follow certain guidelines, you're putting yourself in a position to pay absolutely zero in capital gains tax. That's it. It's all about investment property where you sell it and you buy it within these timeframes that I will review. And if you follow these guidelines, you're going to pay absolutely zero in capital gains tax. Like Coco mentioned in the beginning, this has got to be one of the greatest wealth building tools that exists out there, period, hands down. Imagine where you can buy something, it appreciates significantly in value, and when selling it, you don't have to pay the piper at all. All you have to do is reinvest and continue to make a fortune in the real estate game that you're already endowed in. So it's a great tool. It is very popular. Investors use this all the time, whether it's the first time investor or the investor that's done tens, hundreds, sometimes even thousands of 1031 exchanges. So that's what a 1031 exchange is. And I got to tell you, giving seminars for years and talking to so many different people, and I ask them the same question every single time. Why do people do 1031 exchanges? And I got to tell you, about 85% of the time, the answer is always to not pay capital gains tax. I disagree. If you do not want to pay capital gains tax, there is a very simple strategy. Do not sell the property. So if the sole goal is not to pay capital gains tax, do not sell. People do a 1031 exchange for a variety of different reasons. And I think in the state of California, these reasons become more obvious than any other area. Now, a little history about myself. My grandparents emigrated from Central America to San Francisco, California in 1938. They bought a single family residence in the Bernal Heights area of San Francisco for $3,700. That property is 1,200 square feet on a 3,000 square foot lot, a 3 and 2, and they bought it for $3,700. That same property today is worth about $2 million. It's huge. The problem is if you sell that property, you're going to lose probably about 30 to 40% in taxes. It is amazing to know that in the state of California, in certain areas, and primarily in the Bay Area, you can buy something for a very small price and make massive appreciation. What's also amazing is that California will take a big chunk of that, and Uncle Sam will take a big chunk of that back when you eventually sell that asset. So my grandparents came here in the 30s. But what's more important to me is my parents bought a piece of investment property in a primary residence in San Francisco in the 70s. And in the Noe Valley district of San Francisco, they bought a 3-unit building for $52,000. That property today is worth more than $3 million. It's a free and clear property. And I got to tell you, I ask so many people out there, is this a good piece of investment property for my parents today? Free and clear, fully rented. They've owned it for obviously about 50 years. Is this good? And I'd say the majority of time people say that this is a good piece of investment property. The reality is this is a horrible piece of investment property. We own investment property for 4 different reasons. Reason number 1, cash flow. The property that they currently have, they get about $6,000 a month in cash flow. Now, that's not market value, but they're also subject to rent control in San Francisco, and it is very difficult for them to raise rent. It's very difficult for them to get tenants out of that property. So their cash flow, which actually looks like $6,000, But at the end of the day, that's the gross. The net that they get is probably about $4,000 because of the different expenses that come with the property, because the property was also built in 1903. So there's always something going on with this property, always things to pay for with this property. There's different things that happen in certain areas in the Bay Area that you have to adhere to, whether it be soft story, whether it be rent control, whether it be just maintenance of the property. There's so many different things that can happen. So when it comes to cash flow, horrible piece of investment property, way under market value rent. Second reason we own investment property is depreciation. Now, depreciation is great when it comes to investment property because you have income coming in and you're going to be paying taxes on that income. The depreciation is a way that you can shelter that income. It's a write-off. Now, for residential property and for commercial property, they have two different schedules. For residential property, you can depreciate the property for 27.5 years. For commercial property, it's 39 years. So for when you're talking multifamily product, like a 3-unit building, it's residential property because anything 4 units or less is residential property. Anything more than 4 units is considered commercial, and you go on a different depreciation schedule. But they've owned the property for like 50 years. So for over 20 years, they have not been able to depreciate the property and take advantage of the depreciation. And by the way, this is how depreciation works. You look at the original purchase price, you take out the value of the land. So let's say they bought it for $50,000, and let's say the land is worth 20% and the structure is worth 80%. You can only depreciate the structure. So divide 27.5 into $40,000. You're not really depreciating that much per year. So when it comes to investment property, we've already learned that the cash flow is poor on this property, considering what you can get in market value rent, and you're subject to rent control. The depreciation on this property ran out years ago. And even if you could depreciate it, you couldn't depreciate it that much because you only depreciate the original purchase price and only the structure's value. The third reason we own investment property is amortization, right? A lot of people buy a property putting a down payment down and then mortgaging the rest, getting a loan to finance the rest. And right now with interest rates the way they are, it's a phenomenal time to buy real estate. Well, when my parents bought the property back in the early 70s, they got a loan. That loan has been paid off for many, many years. Amortization is where you pay off the loan and build up equity. If there is no more loan, there is no more amortization. So I'm looking at this investment property, I'm saying poor cash flow, can't change it. I'm looking at the depreciation, no more left, so no write-offs, paying taxes on all the income. I look at the amortization, it's fully amortized. We're not building equity on this property anymore due to the loan. And the fourth reason we own investment property, and this is the big one for the Bay Area in the state of California, to be honest, appreciation. Now this one, they absolutely killed it. They did phenomenal on the appreciation. But at some point, the appreciation no longer makes sense. You've got over $3 million sitting in that property, and you're making $48,000 a year on that. This is a horrible piece of investment property. Now, what would be worse than keeping this investment property is selling the investment property and paying taxes. If you don't do a 1031 exchange, you're going to pay anywhere, in most cases, between 30 to 40%. This property, all of it is gain. That's over $3 million of gain, over $1 million that they would pay in taxes. To be honest, the biggest loser in this would be me. My inheritance would drop significantly if they were just to cash out. So let's look at why we do a 1031 exchange. Well, maybe we go sell this property, preserve the equity, get better cash flow somewhere else. You don't really have to go that far. You could stay in California. You can go outside of California. But the idea is a lot of people, especially people my parents' age who are in their 70s, they've retired. What would they be looking for right now? Supplemental income. So perhaps you do a 1031 exchange for an increase in cash flow. This property is free and clear. What if they were to buy a property, leverage into a property, and when you do something like that, let's say they sold for $3 million, they have $3 million in equity, and they buy something for $4 or $5 million. The difference up in value, that $1 or $2 million, in this example, a new depreciation schedule. So when we look at investment property and we look at the 1031 exchange, there are many, many, many reasons why people do 1031 exchanges. I got to say the number one reason that I see for people to do 1031 exchanges is probably because they're tired of the tenants, the trash, the toilets, the termites, the taxes, all the terrible T's that you have when owning investment property. I've been a landlord for about 18 years and I've had some good tenants, but I don't know why. I always remember the bad tenants, and those are the ones that stick in your heads. The beautiful thing is you can do a 1031 exchange and perhaps go into passive investment property where you no longer have to manage the investment property. You could put it into a commercial institutional property where you own a fractional interest and do nothing but get paid each month. That's the true power of the 1031 exchange. The way I look at a 1031 exchange is, what don't I like about this current property? Maybe it's the cash flow. Maybe it's the location of the property because of rent control or whatever the reason may be. Maybe I'm just tired of California because so many different things are happening in California and I want to move the money somewhere else. Or maybe I'm the person that owns 12 different single family homes in the state of California and it's just too much and I want to consolidate my real estate portfolio. Or perhaps it's like my parents. They own that one big asset. Well, wouldn't it be really nice if I could sell that one asset and diversify and buy different types of real estate throughout the country? Here's another thing my parents can do, or anybody could do in a 1031 exchange. Wouldn't it be really nice if I could sell that 3-unit building, put $2 million into something I don't have to manage, and then put another $1 million into a property in Hawaii or Tahoe, a property that I'm eventually going to retire in. In a 1031 exchange, it does have to be investment property, but that investment property could eventually be converted into a primary residence or a second home. Again, what is the reason you are looking to unload the property? It's not to not pay the tax. It's usually another motivating reason that will get you out of A to B. What's B? It really depends on your situation. And like I said, maybe the property, I mean, another thing I didn't even mention, the property my parents bought was built in 1903. Imagine the maintenance on something like that. Sometimes people just sell their property because they're tired of dealing with the maintenance and they want to get into something newer. So whether it's reducing management responsibilities, increased cash flow, new depreciation schedule, consolidation, diversification, buying the dream home, buying the second home, all these different reasons. That is why we do 1031 exchanges. That is why it is so powerful that you can preserve all that equity, not pay a cent to Uncle Sam, Uncle Gavin, Uncle Barack, Uncle everybody else that wants to get all of this tax money and put it into what you want and to build a fortune. I've seen it happen so many, many different times in real estate. This is the way. This is what a true investor needs to become very familiar with. And I'm going to go over the reasons why you need to be familiar with it, because there are certain guidelines that you need to follow. Now, the one thing I did want to mention that isn't mentioned that often, that I think really needs to be stressed, the motto for 1031 exchange is buy till you die or swap till you drop. And here's why that's very important. In real estate, like my parents, they bought it for $50,000. It's worth $3 million. If they sell today, you lose over $1 million in taxes. But if they pass away, if you die and you own that real estate, the basis, meaning what's the original purchase price? And I saw it in one of Coco's slides. You have the basis calculated by original purchase price, capital improvements, depreciation. It all changes that number, and that's how you calculate gain. But we can all agree that most basis for real estate that's purchased many years ago is very low. And if you sell, you're going to pay the taxes between that. Oh, my hand doesn't really work like that. The taxes between the basis and the sales price. When you die, that basis is stepped up to current value. The beneficiaries inherit the property and can sell that property without paying any capital gains tax whatsoever. So buy till you die is a huge estate planning term in real estate that is used quite often for the investor. It's not just on your primary, it's on all your real estate. So it's what a lot of the investors do is they continue to buy better and better investment properties, different types of investment properties, and eventually the beneficiaries reap the rewards. Now, quite often you're going to hear out there, I want to do a 1031 exchange. I know what it is. I know why you do it, but what is a like-kind exchange? Why do people always say, I'm going to do a like-kind exchange? Personally, I hate this word. I think it confuses people because when people hear like-kind exchange, I need to buy like-kind property. Here's what normally happens. As an example, somebody's selling an investment property. Let's say it's a single family home that's a rental. So it qualifies, right? It's a residential investment property, single family rental, and they want to sell it. They don't want to pay the taxes. They've owned it a long time. There's going to be a huge hit. They want to do a 1031 exchange and they want to buy like-kind property. I'd say over 50% of the time when I hear somebody say that, they think they can only buy a single family home, or they think they can only buy residential property. Here's the beauty of a 1031 exchange. As long as it's real property used for a business or investment purpose, and that property is in the United States, it qualifies for a 1031 exchange. So if you look at the slide and you look at the left-hand side of the slide, you're going to see the properties that we would probably be more familiar with: single family rentals, the townhome and the condos that are rentals, the plexes, right? The duplex, triplex, fourplex, 10 unit, 20 unit. So vacant land is one that sometimes people don't realize, but it does qualify for a 1031 exchange. As a matter of fact, if you've owned vacant land for a long time, you don't depreciate land. You don't usually collect income on it. But if you have massive appreciation, what are you waiting for? It's probably the perfect opportunity for you to sell that, do a 1031 exchange, and go into an asset that you can now depreciate and collect income on. I have so many people that own vacant land in very plush areas. I was golfing about 2 years ago, and we were at an event, and I was paired up with a guy that owned vacant land in Alamo, California. And he was bragging to me the whole time. Yeah, got this vacant land in Alamo. It's awesome. And I tell everybody about it. And I asked him, I go, well, how much cash flow are you getting on it? And he's like, none. And what depreciation do you take on that? None. Well, what do you do with it? Well, I talk about it. And I told him, I go, look, you could sell that vacant land for millions. You could do a 1031 exchange, and just getting 6% on $2 million would give you $120,000 per year net cash flow. Right now, you are getting nothing. Make your money work for you. So vacant land qualifies. I mentioned earlier, multifamily qualifies. So anything, right? I could sell a 3-unit building in San Francisco and probably buy a 40-unit building in Fort Worth, Texas, if I wanted to. That's the power of the 1031 exchange. Or maybe I own an industrial property. Those are very popular right now. Warehouses all along the 880 corridor. We see tons of those properties. Any of the Amazon properties where they have their big warehouses, that's all 1031 exchange property when they work out of something like that. Office buildings, even though COVID took a big hit to some of the office buildings, some of the smaller office buildings and mixture office industrial buildings, huge market for it. And if you're running your own business, you could even 1031 exchange a residential property into an office or industrial building where you run your own business. All these options exist and they all qualify as like-kind property. Retail qualifies as well. So if you had some sort of a store or some sort of a restaurant, all qualify for a 1031 exchange. Not the business portion, just the real estate portion. Hospitality, we've done so many hotel transactions in my career, and even during COVID, I'd say in 2020, I did about 12 hotel transactions. Not some of the bigger ones in some of the main metropolitan areas, but some in the Central Valley and some in Sacramento County. People are still selling hospitality hotels and getting good prices for them. Senior housing, these on the left-hand side, like I mentioned earlier, they're familiar things that you could say, oh yeah, that's investment property. But on the right-hand side, I've done so many cell phone tower transactions, billboards, windmills, which makes me think of like Livermore in that area. That qualifies for a 1031 exchange. Solar farms, air rights and water rights. One of the biggest transactions we ever had at IPX was in New York. Downtown Manhattan, we had an Italian restaurant. An Italian guy owned it, and the condos around this Italian restaurant bought the air rights from him for $450 million. He sold air rights, was getting nothing on it, did a 1031 exchange and went into all other types of real estate and got income. So ask me first whether or not something does or it doesn't qualify. Even on this list, boat docks, moorings, I had no idea what a mooring was, to be honest, until I got into 1031 exchange. And if you don't know what it is, it's the buoy type thing in the water that you connect your boat to. It's actually deemed real property and qualifies for a 1031 exchange. And for anybody that's very Gothic out there, cemetery plots, they qualify for 1031 exchange and actually appreciate in value significantly. And then fractional ownerships. This one is huge. I could sell something out here, $500,000, do a 1031 exchange and buy a fractional interest in a large commercial institutional property, whether it's a 400 unit apartment complex or part of a medical building, or maybe part of a Costco or something essential. That all is like-kind property in a 1031 exchange. So again, if you tell me what you want to do, I can guide you how you can get to that destination. And what we didn't even list here is how the primary residence, a mixed use property, or a second home, which isn't like kind at first, could eventually qualify as replacement property in a 1031 exchange. Now, here are the properties that don't qualify for a 1031 exchange. Number one, property held primarily for sale. So this is like for the flippers out there, right? Somebody who buys, fixes, and sells right away. The IRS says, hey, that property is held for resale purposes, doesn't qualify. And then I got a lot of the flippers that call me and say, okay, James, hey, I did a lot of flips this year, but at some point I'm going to make too much money this year. I want to hold a few of them, maybe just one or two. How do I qualify for the 1031 exchange? Fix it, rent it. Then they say, well, how long do I have to rent it? Because I don't want to hold it for a long period of time. Well, there is no black and white on how long you have to rent it. The aggressive CPA says rent it for 1 year and 1 day, because by definition, that's a capital long-term investment. The CPA that's in the middle says just cross 2 tax years and we'll be comfortable with that. And then the most conservative route would be to rent it and depreciate it for 2 full years, because there is revenue procedure that supports that. Personal property, as of January 2018, with the tax reform, was excluded from the code. So that is more like tractors, right? So like farm equipment, even livestock used to qualify for a 1031 exchange. Or if I sell a gas station, the equipment, the mini mart, or businesses, there's going to be a component that's personal and a component that's real property. No personal property qualifies for a 1031 exchange any longer, just real property. I mean, I did a Monet artwork transaction for a Kandinsky artwork transaction. That's where like kind, when we had personal property exchanges, made sense to me. But it's no longer in existence, so those are gone. Stocks, bonds, or notes don't qualify. Securities don't qualify. So the REIT, the real estate investment trust, does not really qualify as replacement property in a 1031 exchange. But if your heart is set on getting into a REIT, I can show you how to get there. It's a different type of exchange, and you're going to have to wait a little while to get there. So if somebody is really interested in getting into a REIT, please let me know. Interest in a partnership do not qualify. So what this means is I could sell a piece of investment property, and maybe there's like a project going on where everybody came into a LLC and they're going into one LLC to build whatever it is. That does not work. You cannot sell as James, for example, and then buy into a partnership. Does not work. I can buy with the partnership, but not into a partnership. So you can't buy interest in a partnership. A primary residence or the second home, they do not qualify either. But get this, there are so many primary residences, especially in the Bay Area, that do qualify for a 1031 exchange.
I can't get this stupid thing. Could you stop it? I was listening.
Does somebody have a question?
I think you can move on. Sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. So the primary residence does not qualify for a 1031 exchange, but it's in particular in the Bay Area. There are many, many primary residences that are mixed use. So what that means is if I am claiming on my tax returns for the primary residence that there's an investment component to it, that percentage would be for 1031 exchange purposes. The other percentage, the primary residence, if I've lived there 2 out of the last 5 years, I'm protected. 250,000 of my gain is tax-free on the primary side if I'm single, and 500 if I'm married. So here's an example. Many people right now are working from their homes because of COVID. and many people are claiming an actual percentage on their tax returns for investment purposes. Maybe it's a home office, who knows what it is. That percentage qualifies only for 1031, not the 250, 500. Or maybe you're renting out rooms, or maybe there's an in-law that you're renting, or an ADU unit that you're renting, or maybe there's a casita, or maybe you live on a farm and the farm qualifies for the exchange, but not the primary residence. So there are many instances where the primary residence and the 1031 exchange can actually coexist. So if you know, like, for example, in a duplex, I live in one unit and rent out the other, well, you're doing both section codes, the primary residence exclusion and the 1031 exchange in scenarios like that. But a primary residence on its own does not qualify for the 1031 exchange, nor does a second home. As a matter of fact, the second home qualifies for nothing, but it's very easy to convert a second home into investment property. All you have to do is rent it out 14 days out of the year. You could Airbnb it. So here's the criteria. Rent it out 14 days out of the year. Do not use it for personal use more than 14 days out of the year. Do that for 2 consecutive years, and then you can do a 1031 exchange with that asset. So you could have bought the Tahoe property in 1990, and now the kids have grown up, and nobody uses the property. Start to Airbnb it. And then after 2 years, sell it, protect all the equity, and go into something else that suits you better. And finally on this list, foreign property qualifies for a 1031 exchange, but foreign property for US property or US property for foreign property in a 1031 exchange does not work. The most foreign you can get in a domestic 1031 exchange is some of the US territories, but you cannot sell in the United States and buy in Europe, for example, or Asia, or anywhere else that's not a part of the USA. And the reason behind that is when you eventually sell that new property, Uncle Sam is not going to get paid. So here are the taxes that you would defer in a 1031 exchange. These actually changed recently. They went a little bit higher, but not much. Federal tax is either going to be at 15 or 20%. Actually can hit you at 10 if you almost make absolutely nothing. You have to be at a very low adjusted gross income for the year. But it's either going to hit you at 15 or 20. The thresholds are on the screen. You can always call me if you're curious or want more information on that. The state tax, and we're just talking about the state of California, it's different in different states. Some don't have state tax. We are the highest in the nation, and it ranges based on your adjusted gross income from 9.3 to 13.3. And then that Obamacare, that's still in place. So once you cross a threshold of 200 if you're single or 250 if you're married, tack on an additional 3.8% that you would be paying in taxes. And all the depreciation that I mentioned earlier that you claimed, they will recapture, the IRS that is, 25% of that. If you put this all together, the lowest you're probably going to pay is about 30%, and the highest you're probably going to pay for one of your high net worth situations is about 40% on every dollar of gain. That is a lot of money to lose, and that's why the 1031 exchange is very, very powerful. So in a 1031 exchange, and I'm going to go over the process right now, a general rule, when it comes to who does the exchange, the taxpayer that is selling must be the taxpayer that is buying. So the entity that owns the property should be the entity that's purchasing. This can get a little bit tricky sometimes. Most people hold title when it's for residential property, either in their names or in a trust. For commercial property, most of them own it in either a corporation or LLC. That entity, that taxpayer is who needs to do the 1031 exchange. And sometimes when you own property with others and it's in one entity, it can be a problem in a 1031 exchange. So in this slide, it says a corporation is selling and the corporation must buy. Well, if that corporation has 3 people in it, and the corporation has to do the exchange, and some of the people in the corporation don't want to do the exchange, this could be a problem in 1031 land. And if it's in a corporation, it's pretty difficult to save. If it's in an LLC or a trust, there are probably ways that you could save it, but it takes proper planning and consultation way in advance of selling the asset. So real quickly, a couple of 1031 basic rules that I want everybody to be familiar with, and I'll go back over that selling and buying and same entity because I want to make sure we all understand it. To be in a position to pay absolutely zero in capital gains tax, you want to buy out equal or greater to what you sold. Now, if you want to get technical, you can take out the non-reoccurring closing costs, which is basically real estate commissions, transfer tax, and your title and escrow fees, anywhere from 5 to 7%. Somewhere in that ballpark, but that's the target price. So if you're selling for $1 million, it's real easy to say target price $1 million. If you want to get technical about it, it's probably closer to about 950,000. Now, you need to reinvest all of the proceeds. So a lot of the time the people say, hey, how come I don't just have to invest the gain? Because those are the rules. That's, the real harsh truth about it. And some people say, well, why do I have to reinvest all the proceeds? I came up with the original down payment. That's not a part of this. I don't understand. Well, your friend James over here doesn't understand either. I don't think it's fair, but nobody cares what I think. It's the IRS rules. Any money that you do keep, they're going to say you're taking that off of the gain. It is not from your original down payment. So to be in a position to pay zero in capital gains tax, equal or greater, using all the proceeds. And the final component is if there is a loan on the property being sold, you need to replace that loan with either a new loan or new cash. If the property is free and clear, it's very easy. Use all the cash. If there is a loan, the loan gets paid off when the property that you're selling closes, and then the cash goes into the exchange account. To get to equal or greater, you're going to have to make it up with either a new loan or new cash. If for whatever reason you don't replace all of the debt, or you don't use all of the cash, any cash left over, taxable. Any loan that you don't replace, taxable, but it doesn't kill the exchange. Only that portion would be taxable. So some people strategically keep some cash for whatever their reason may be, and some people strategically buy of less value and they're okay with paying a little bit of tax. It's up to them. So here's how an example would roll out in terms of a 1031 exchange. You'd put the property on the market. Well, first off, you go to a listing appointment with Coco and determine that this is the time to sell the property for whatever the reason may be, probably one of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. Goes on the market, you eventually accept an offer, you open up escrow, and then you open up the 1031 exchange account. This must be done prior to the close of escrow. No 1031 exchange property can close without our paperwork being in place. This is so important. I have received so many calls where people think they can do a reverse exchange or they haven't received the check yet or what have you. If the paperwork is not in place and signed prior to the close of escrow, that property cannot be included in a 1031 exchange, and you will pay taxes on that gain if that is the relinquished property. And here's how it rolls out. Just like I mentioned earlier, you want to get property listed, property in contract, open up escrow, 1031 exchange paperwork in place. By the way, in order to set up the 1031 exchange account, I will need a copy of the sales contract. I will need a copy of the title report. The reason why I need a copy of the sales contract, we, as the qualified intermediary, IPX becomes the seller. So we assign into the rights of the contract, act as the seller. So for the benefit of the seller, we become the seller. And we need the title report because it will show me the vesting. Again, we go back to the title issue. Whoever is selling needs to buy. So this will be set up prior to the close of escrow. And then at the close of escrow, all the liens are paid off and the remainder of the proceeds go into the 1031 exchange account, and then the clock starts ticking. And this is where you have to be very aggressive and be very quick with what you're going to do, because you only have 45 calendar days to identify potential replacement property. In my opinion, I am not going to list my property without an exit strategy in mind, probably an exit strategy plan A, B, and C. And if somebody is willing to accept a contingent upon sale offer, that would be fantastic. Usually does not happen in this market, but depending upon what you're looking to buy, you might be able to secure your replacement property prior to the close of escrow of the property that you're selling. So we'll put that in place. We'll look to find replacement property very quickly. We'll identify it in writing to us as the qualified intermediary within the 45-day period, and we will close within 180 days. There are no real extensions on this, although with natural disasters and acts of terrorism, and we've seen a couple of natural disasters, there may be an extension. You cannot count on it. You have to get things done within those timeframes. No exceptions unless the IRS lists one. Now when it comes to identification, there are 2 rules and 1 exception. The most popular rule, because you can't just give me the entire MLS and say, here, I identified, I'm going to buy something. It doesn't work that way. The first rule and the most popular rule is the 3 property rule. This rule allows you to identify up to 3 properties of any value. I'm looking to buy one. What are the other 2 for? They're backups. Now, the cool thing about the 3 properties rule is I can identify a property of any size. It could be $3, it could be $300 billion. There is no limit. The only limit is I can only identify 3. So for the person that's looking to buy that 1 property, this is the rule that is very common, or even 2 properties that are larger. They use the 3 property rule very often. But there is that person that says, you know what, James, I'm done with California. And I do have a client that did this recently. Sold a piece of real estate in San Jose for $700,000. Property was condemned. No one had lived there. Was investment property. Still got $700,000. Free and clear. He went to Buffalo, New York, bought condos out there for $30,000 a pop. I don't know anything about Buffalo, but I know in order to get to an equal or greater number, you're going to have to buy a lot of $30,000 condos, and the 3 property rule will not work for something like this. In this scenario, you will use the 200% rule. The 200% rule is as follows. Look at the sales price of what you sold, $700,000 in this example, multiply it times 2. That gives you 200%. That is $1.4 million. That lets us identify $1.4 million worth of real estate. That is a lot of $30,000 condos that you can identify. You don't have to close on all of them. Ideally, you close on at least $700,000 worth. And the third and final rule, which is more like an exception, is called the 95% exception. It says you can identify as many properties as you want. Doesn't matter what the value is, but you need to close on 95% of the value that you identify. Basically, this means you close on everything. And if you don't, your entire exchange fails. That's why almost no one uses this rule. In my 23-year career, I've done over 50,000 exchanges. I've seen this rule used maybe about 10, 11 times. If you need it, I'll let you know. This is a topic I wanted to touch on today because it is very, very, very popular in this market. As we all know, if somebody says, you know what, James, I want to do a 1031 exchange, but I want to buy that perfect property. I want to buy that ideal property in Danville, California, in Fremont, California, in the Mission Hills. I want to get the ideal asset in Los Gatos, wherever it is. It could be in any state. But here's the problem, James. If I have only 45 days to find the property, it's just not going to happen. There's no inventory available. The likelihood of me finding what I really want, I'm going to fail. But I know the property that I'm selling is right here in the Bay Area. And if I put it on the market, I'll have 10 offers in 2 weeks. How do I make this happen? And I let them know in scenarios like this, you may want to consider the reverse exchange. The reverse exchange is where you buy that ideal property first, and then you sell your property. When people hear that, most of them say, well, why doesn't everybody do the reverse exchange? Then we don't have to worry about the 45-day period. And then I come back to them and I tell them, in a reverse exchange, you have to buy first, and you have not sold the relinquished property. How are you going to buy the property? And some people say, I don't have the money to do that because what I was counting on was all the equity in this property to purchase that property. Some people say, I can do that, but I'm going to have to get a loan. And some people say, I've got the cash. I can make that happen. For anybody that has the cash, this is a very easy transaction. So the reverse exchange is as follows. Coco finds the property for you, gets you in the contract, open up escrow, contacts James to set up the 1031 exchange account. We would put together similar paperwork to a forward exchange, but a lot more in depth. And the difference is the exchange company in this scenario would set up an LLC that would go on title to the target property so that the client doesn't own both properties at the same time. You can't exchange with yourself. So we would set up an LLC. LLC goes on title at the close. And then you have 180 days to sell your relinquished property. And as long as you can make it happen within those timeframes, you got the property that you wanted. You sold your property in 180 days, you paid no capital gains tax. Here are the challenges. Not many people have all cash to make this happen. So when you have to get a loan for residential property, most lenders will not allow the LLC to go on title. In a scenario like this, you may have to go private money. So now your fees have increased significantly. By the way, the reverse exchange fees are higher because we set up an LLC, we go on title. And then there may also be, depending upon where you buy the property, dual transfer tax. LLC goes on title, unless the client wants to take over the LLC. The title will go into the name of the asset that was being sold. So it could be, if it was me, James is selling in his trust. He's buying in the LLC in the reverse, and then he goes into his trust. 2 transfers. I could get hit with dual transfer tax in this scenario, and the fees can go up very, very significantly. So in a reverse exchange, it could be more expensive, more challenging, and most importantly, I have to be able to buy that property first. And if it is commercial property, it could be a little bit easier with the lender, but then there may need to be some environmental reports on that. I wanted to bring this up today because we'd see, I'd say about 20% of my clients call me today wanting to do a reverse exchange. And of that 20%, I'd say about 50% go through with the reverse exchange. A lot of people are doing reverse exchanges right now. It is very, very popular just because of the lack of inventory for a particular product type that they want. The other topic I wanted to mention was the improvement exchange. There are many, many clients out there that say, James, okay, here's the deal. I'm selling for $1 million and I found the perfect property in the perfect location. It's going to go for about $850,000, but it needs about $200,000 of work. Is there any way that I could use the proceeds to improve the property that I'm going to buy? And the answer is yes, but it is challenging. The first way, which is very uncommon, is to have the seller of that replacement property do the improvements prior to the close of escrow, increase the sales price to include those improvements. You and I both know that that is very unlikely to happen unless there are very small, insignificant improvements and there is not a lot of other people trying to buy the property without improvements. So that's probably out the window in most cases. The second way is the improvement exchange. The improvement exchange, like the reverse exchange, is where we as the exchange company set up an LLC. LLC goes on title at the close. While we are on title, the improvements need to be done. Here's the problem with the improvement exchange. You have to get the improvements done within 180 days. And then you'll take title prior to day 181, and the improvements will be included. So you can pay out the general contractor, the subcontractors within that time frame. And as long as everything can be identified within 45 days in terms of the improvements that you're going to do and be completed within 180 days, it counts as part of your exchange. So the question comes up quite often, can I do improvements? Yes, but talk to James and I will walk you through that process to see whether or not it is something that is feasible for you to get done. I've had many people say, I'm going to buy a property in Tahoe and I want to build on it. Well, you're not going to build on a property in Tahoe in the winter months that easily. So there's a lot of factors that take place. And if anybody wants to build in San Francisco, I think we all know that the permit process is incredibly difficult and challenging to get done. But depending upon the improvements, what you want to do, how much you want to spend, it is a possibility. Okay. Who can be the qualified intermediary? This is an answer that most of you probably aren't even expecting. Almost anybody can be a qualified intermediary. It is an unregulated industry. And basically, there's only a few people that are disqualified, and everybody else can be a qualified intermediary. So you can't be your own qualified intermediary. That doesn't work. You can't touch the money. A related party of the exchanger can't be a qualified intermediary. And then basically, your attorney, your CPA, or any agent of the exchanger can't be. Everybody else, it's an opportunity to be a qualified intermediary. You could be the exchange company. Now be very careful with this because you're giving hundreds of thousands of money to somebody. You want to make sure that your money is safe and doesn't go into the hands of somebody like Rocco over here, because that would be a disastrous story. There have been some defalcations in the 1031 industry. I would not trust my money personally with the mom and pop company. I would want to see the security that I deserve for my proceeds and only go with some of the bigger boys out there in the industry. We are the largest qualified intermediary and we have the protection backed by our parent company And that's just a very, very important thing when it comes to a 1031 exchange. And finally, question to think about, one of the biggest criminals of our generation, Al Capone, what did he get prosecuted for? Tax evasion. So when you think about the rules of a 1031 exchange, what you can or can't do, be very careful. The IRS looks at this with scrutiny. I don't want people breaking rules. It is very free to call me and ask me questions, and I'm very happy to give you consultation on what does or doesn't work. And with that, I don't know how much longer, Coco, you want me to go on, but I think we're at the time you wanted me to hit. Are we?
Let's maybe we can take some questions in a moment. I got a lot of questions sent to me privately because we're not allowing people to just post questions for security purposes. But I think this is great information. Thank you, James.
You're
I
welcome.
think I learned a lot about different motives for investment properties. I especially enjoy your detailed definition of what it is and what isn't a like-kind property. You're very, very clear about your 3 options for identifying replacement properties. So I think those are all very good information. So we have been streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, and other platforms today, and we have gathered some questions for our guest, James, to answer. But I give you a chance to rest while I introduce my next seminar. So in 2 weeks, our CPA Bin Zai will be back to tell us all about different business structures and their tax implications. He will talk about C Corps, S Corps, limited liability corporations, and more. So James, maybe you can just unshare for one moment, and then we can have Bing give us a quick preview of our upcoming session. Bing, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi Bing. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Hi, how you doing?
Good, thank you. So give us a quick preview of the upcoming session.
Okay, during my practice for all the clients, we always have people to ask if I want to have my business set up. Do I need to do incorporation or not? Am I supposed to be unincorporated business or corporate business? And I think those have a big impact on your tax return filing. So in the next seminar, co-host with Coco T.A.N Realty, we will talk about should you incorporate or not, or how many legal entities types can you use for your business. And we're also going to talk about what is difference between the legal entity and the tax entity, and what is a pass-through entity for a lot of small business. And also we, as since we talk about the tax, we also should talk about how to avoid the double tax inside the corporation. So those topics will benefit for the small business mind client, and what kind of formation you should use when you venture your next business. So.
Great, thank you, Bing. So everybody join us on January 19th for the second session of our Investors Medley series, a course on corps. So now let's start with the question and answer with James.
One thing I want to interject, Coco, just an update on the runoff. We're about 70% of the vote in right now. The Republican Party is in the lead, but it's a very tight race. David Perdue's at about 50.7. And John Ossoff is at 49.3, and Kelly Loeffler is at 50.3, and Raphael Warnock is at 49.7. So I think this one, we're not going to know how it's going to end up till like it's 100% reported in. It's very close right now.
We're going to invite you back with all the political updates as well.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to mention it during the presentation, but there are a lot of things in Biden's plan that would impact real estate. And Ben, I know you know all the different taxes that are going to be increased if he wins or that he's proposed. We'll see what happens. So it's interesting stuff. And I think this could dictate if he's going to have the power to do so quickly or he won't. If the Republicans win, I think things will probably remain the same.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the update. So I have a lot of people ask me whether they can get a copy of the PowerPoint. I think Dolly just dropped our email address, coco10group@gmail.com. So if you wish to receive a copy of the slides, please email us, or you can leave us your email. And then James, can you please email me your slides so I can forward on to the people who are interested in getting a copy?
Absolutely.
Okay, so one question is, can I make my primary home as an investment property by renting it out for 2 years? And then take
Yeah,
advantage of
I
both.
think-
I think you mentioned that already, right?
I didn't have the time to really go into that. I think that is a great strategy that is very popular in the Bay Area and in highly appreciated areas. A lot of people have gains that exceed the $250,000, $500,000 exclusion. And their strategy is to move out for 1 to 2 years, rent it, and then sell it. They still will have lived in the property 2 out of the last 5 years. They collect the entire $250,000, $500,000, and they can 1031 exchange the remainder. There is no black and white on how long you have to rent the property out in order to qualify for a 1031 exchange. What I found in my career is that most aggressive CPAs like 1 year and 1 day of rent. Again, the conservative cat likes 2 years, and then the person in the middle likes to cross 2 tax years. It's truly up to the tax advisor to determine how long they have to rent that property before they sell it and qualify for the 1031 exchange. But I would also highly recommend that prior to renting it 3 years, that they sell and unload the assets so that they can still get the $250,000, $500,000. It is a great way to manipulate the codes in your favor.
Okay, so and then another person asking, let's say if I have done 1031 exchange, after a few years, I want to make it as a primary home, so the reverse type of situation. What are the tax implications? Good thing we have both CPA and also James online right now.
There's no implication on conversion. If they eventually sell the property, they will prorate it. The years that it was a rental, because we're past 2009 and they changed the section code, or they added an amendment to it, the years that it was a rental will not count towards the exclusion. And the years that it was a primary residence will count towards the exclusion. They will also have to own it for a minimum of 5 years in order to qualify for the primary residence exclusion. That is only when you're coming out of a 1031 exchange and converting the property. So let's say, for example, they rented it for 2 years and then they lived in it for 8 years. They owned it a total of 10 years. 80% could be applied towards the primary residence exclusion, but those 2 years, that 20% will not, and nor will it ever. And a lot of CPAs want the depreciation recapture to be paid when they eventually sell that asset as well.
Got it. Okay, so the next question, can I sell my investment property and buy my daughter's property as an exchange? My daughter wants to sell her house and move to a bigger house.
No, well, you can do whatever you want, but if you get audited, you'll probably have a big problem. When you deal with related parties, and in 1031 land, related parties only mean brother, sister, mother, father, grandparents, grandchildren, children. Any linear person is a related party. And in this example, you're buying from your daughter and their primary residence is what you are buying. When you buy from a related party, it is mandatory that you own that new property that you bought from the daughter in this scenario for a minimum of 2 years. And it is also mandatory that the daughter does a 1031 exchange as well and holds on to her new property for a minimum of 2 years. In this scenario, she doesn't even qualify for a 1031 exchange because it is a primary residence. There's also the argument that if there was no basis shifting, you could still move forward with it. But I have to tell you, when you fill out the 8824 form for doing a 1031 exchange, one of the questions they ask is, did you buy or sell from a related party? So the chances of you being audited increase significantly. So if you're going to buy from a related party, please have the conversation with me. I'll review the numbers. And if there's any kind of basis shift, I would highly recommend against it. And especially in that scenario, it just is going to look bad all over because the daughter is just selling the property and going to get the exclusion money. That one in particular, I would not recommend. Do some people still do it? Probably. I would not recommend it at all. Nor would their tax advisor. The tax advisor probably wouldn't even sign off on the returns if they saw something like that happen.
Okay.
And Ben's doing this, so
Yeah, that's right.
he agrees.
Yeah. I met that kind of case before. They don't want to do the proportion reporting on the rental, so I said I cannot sign.
I've seen that
Yeah,
happen.
right.
And that's why I talk to the CPAs when it becomes aggressive like that, Coco, or that they're breaking rules, obvious rules. I really want the tax advisor involved because I don't want them coming to me a year later saying, James, you didn't tell me, and now my tax advisor won't sign off on my returns.
We want you to save money, not to break the law, right?
Yeah, you have to buy from somebody else, not your daughter in this situation.
Okay.
Don't do
Does
that,
REIT
and that's okay.
qualify as a like-kind exchange? Is another question.
A REIT does not
REIT, yeah.
qualify as a like-kind transaction because a real estate investment trust is a security. It's not real property. However, there are strategies in place. For example, you can buy into a DST, a Delaware Statutory Trust, which is basically owning a fractional interest in a large commercial institutional property. So here would be the example. You sell the single family home, it's a rental. You want to get into a REIT, can't do it right away. Then you go into the DST where you own a fractional interest in a large institutional property. That DST is going to be bought by the REIT in a couple of years. So you're actually going through a different section code, 721, to get to the REIT. So can you get into a REIT right away? Probably not. It's difficult. There are some strategies you can use to get into a REIT eventually. But when you're in a REIT, when you ever sell that REIT, there is no more opportunity to do a 1031 exchange. You can only just cash out. So you can get into the REIT, get the dividends that you want, and stay in the REIT. But anytime you liquidate the REIT, you'll pay capital gains tax.
Got it. There's another question. If I do exchange to the property in another state, how is the state tax going to be handled?
Well, what you have to make sure is that you file informational returns to the Franchise Tax Board each year, showing that you have not sold the new property. Governor Brown in 2014 implemented what we know as Assembly Bill 92, the California clawback, which says that when you sell in the state of California and buy in any other state, it is mandatory that you file these informational returns. So we know you have not sold that new property. If you fail to do so, technically, they say they can go after you to pay everything that is owed to California. I've seen that threat. I've also seen fines. But the moral of the story is, yes, you can leave the state of California, go somewhere else. The new appreciation, if you were to cash out, would be taxed at that state level. But the old appreciation that you gained while you were in the state of California, they believe is owed to them. But if you follow what I said in the beginning, buy till you die, no one's getting paid.
Gotcha. If someone asks if they sell their home in Canada, if they sell a property in Canada, can they use 1031 exchange to buy investment property in America? I think you mentioned about a foreign country.
No, they could buy foreign property, but they cannot buy domestic property. Unfortunately, Canadians will have to buy somewhere else.
Yeah, so if they have like 90,000 capital gain, so do they need to pay for the capital gains taxes? So they have to unless they do the 1031 overseas, correct?
Right, and that's more of a bin question on how the Canadian gains would impact them on their taxes. I don't think they would get hit twice, would they, Ben?
Yeah, they will get the foreign tax credit for any tax they paid on the other country, as long as the other country has a tax treaty with the United States.
And does Canada have one?
Yeah, yes, of course. They're the
I mean, I know we have NAFTA.
Yeah, they have NAFTA too. They have a lot of other stuff. Yeah, so
I guess you'd have
you
to
won't
find out
pay
if there was
double tax. So any tax you pay on the same property to the other country, you can deduct on the United States return.
So maybe you could offset some gains that way.
Yeah,
as well.
if Canada's tax is lower than the US, then you pay more. If you pay higher, you don't need to
Offset
pay
the difference.
United States. Most likely, Canada's tax going to be higher. Because depends. I don't know what their tax rate. But if you pay sufficiently in Canada, you probably don't have to pay in the United States.
Cool.
And I know that's more than what the client asked, but those are really important points to understand when you own assets outside of the country. Yes, you wanted to know if you could buy here, but I think it's also important that you know the tax consequences since you live here and own out of the country.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. So someone mentioned about you mentioned if you rent out some rooms in the primary home, the owner also live in the same property. Can the property to just do the 1031 exchange? Your answer was yes.
It's a mixed use property in that scenario. So remember, if you're renting out rooms, you better be claiming that income, because I've had many people that don't claim the income. It's not deemed investment property. That's deemed fraud at that point. You're supposed to be claiming the income and depreciating that portion of the property. And what you would have in that scenario is a mixed use property where a portion, whatever percentage they've claimed on their returns as investment property, would qualify for the exchange, and the remainder would be protected under Section Code 121, the primary residence exclusion.
So this person also asked for the rent out portion, does that need to be depreciated?
I'd take the write-off on that.
Okay, great. And then for the reverse exchange, under what circumstances would you end up having to pay for double transfer tax?
In most counties, when the LLC goes on title, and if the client does not want to keep the LLC, some people keep the LLC, but that also has an annual fee. If it gets transferred over, like let's say I'm doing the reverse exchange and the property I'm selling is in my name, but I'm doing the reverse, so it goes into the name of the LLC at the close. That's one transfer. And then I sell my property and complete the exchange, and either I take over the LLC, then there isn't a transfer, or it goes into my name, James. That's two transfers. So I'll get hit with dual transfer tax in most counties.
Got it. Can a foreigner living other country do a 1031 exchange to avoid to defer the capital gains tax?
We have many foreigners that do 1031 exchanges on their properties, investment properties that they own in the United States, but it is challenging because there is a federal withholding that is 15%, which is very high. Here's what I recommend for any foreigner selling investment property. Before you put your property on the market, fill out the 8288 form. It's the waiver request form that you'd submit to the IRS. And so it goes by country code. And here's the bad news. It takes probably 30 to 90 days to get accepted, depending upon how backlogged they are at the IRS. But you also have to fax it in. They're so old school, they still don't accept email. And you send it in, I know, it's true. And you send it in with a copy of the accepted contract. So it's not like you can send it in ahead of time. The day my contract gets accepted, I would already have the form filled out. I would fax it in. I would want the waiver request sent in so they could approve it, so that the 15% would not apply. Then I would move forward with my 1031 exchange. But I want that waiver request to be accepted prior to the close of escrow. Otherwise, it's not gonna get me out of the 15% withholding. Now, there's ways around that. I could come in with the 15% out of my own pocket and have it flow through the exchange. But not many people have that kind of money to make things like that happen. So I would probably ask for a longer escrow so that that waiver could get approved.
That is great advice. That's a great advice. To not to have that high withholding. That's always the issue with all the foreigners.
It's huge, and foreigners panic. And I've done almost every country where whether it's China, Switzerland, or Italy, or who cares, find out, get that form in place, be ready to submit it once you accept an offer, and probably ask for a longer escrow because you want the waiver request to be approved.
So, and then following that question, if they have cash left after buying, how is the cash going to be taxed? And also, what's the tax rate? It sounds like CPA question. If paid cash for the current property, can we take out a loan to buy the exchange property?
So how they're going to be taxed is going to be based on their adjusted gross income, and it varies, and it could, go into different numbers depending upon how much money they keep and if they cross certain thresholds. Now, what was the second part? I mentioned a lot of these things where, you can use all the money, and then after you finish your exchange, refinance and take money out and use that money for other things. That is sometimes a better way than keeping money out. Coco, could you please repeat the second part of the question I want to make sure I understood that correctly. The first part is answered. Your adjusted gross income will determine how much you are going to be paying taxes on what is referred to as the boot. And as I mentioned earlier, that usually is around 30 to 40%. In certain scenarios, it could be a little bit less, but most people in the Bay Area are paying around 30% at least.
So the second part is saying if they're paying cash for the exchange property, I guess, can they also take out a loan to buy the exchange property? I'm not quite sure. So WW, if you can clarify on your second part.
I think I understand the question, and this one's very important. And I'll say it in a couple of different ways, just in case I'm misunderstanding the question. You need to use all your cash. You can't replace the cash with larger debt. So if you're coming out of a property and it's free and clear, and you have $500,000, target price is $500,000. Some people say, okay, I just buy something for $500,000. I'll put 300 down. I'll keep 200, and I bought of equal or greater value. Does not work that way. Any cash kept is taxable. In a scenario like that, I would recommend putting all the money in and then refinancing afterwards, especially if you're taking out that large amount. If you're taking out a small amount, figure out whether the loan fees would be more than the taxes you would pay and make a decision based on that.
Okay. So Tito
I
is asking.
think that's what they wanted to. Ben, did you think that was what they were asking?
Yes, what you said is right. You will be taxed on the difference of the cash and the difference of the loan, normally at the 1031 exchange. So your new property, the cash at least higher than before, and the loan should be higher than before. Then you can make the new exchange property higher than before.
Yeah, a lot of people.
You can't just use one of it.
Yeah, you can use cash, buy multiple properties, or you can use the cash as a down payment and leverage up.
Right.
And buy a
leverage up. Right. Yeah. Right.
It's great. I think we get this good answer. Then here, Tito is asking, if I buy a fixer, construct and sell, tax filing should be easy. Only Schedule E is required. If I buy a land, construct, then sell, how and where do I take the deduction of 1 year of the property tax, land, loan interest, etc., while plans and permits going on? That sounds like a tax question.
That's a bin question.
Yeah. Well, first of all, if he sold the rental property to buy a pure land, I don't think are they qualified as
yeah, it qualifies.
1031 exchange if you don't rent it out,
Yeah, well, you could do the 1031 exchange, buy the bare land, let it sit, and then build later, and you probably wouldn't have an issue. You may pay the depreciation recapture because you're going from a structure to a non-structure on something like that.
I worry that it wouldn't be counted as a kind of exchange if you just buy a land.
It works.
Don't do any unless they do some.
They don't have to do. They don't have to do improvements. The bare land will qualify. And they
I know the bare land was qualified, but they probably still have to rent the land out. Maybe do some pumpkin patch sale on the land, or do some Christmas tree. That's.
Most of the experts in our industry are comfortable with them just sitting on the land for appreciation purposes.
Really? Okay.
It's not an issue. Yeah, it'd be better if they got income, obviously, whether it's the Christmas tree or pumpkin tree or the pumpkin patch or flea market or whatever, or grazing cattle sometimes when it's just acreage. But you can buy bare land. But that particular question, I think, was more on the property taxes, and I got to think with the improvements they would reassess and charge they would charge more than the original purchase. I'm not positive on how that would pencil.
The lender will reassess for the new property tax. Yes.
And unfortunately, the flipper at that point doesn't really qualify for a 1031 exchange. That would be pretty aggressive. If you bought land, built on it, and then just look to resell it, I'd recommend, like I said earlier, to rent it out for at least a year.
Okay.
2 tax return. Normally I tell them 2 tax return.
Ben's more conservative than others. It depends who you ask.
Yeah.
That's why I always say check with your tax advisor. I do hear
1 year and a half, minimum. I would say 1 year and a half. Otherwise, it's very hard to prove you have intended to do the rental.
Cool. Mary asked this question, which goes with your presentation, James, about the intermediary. How do you prevent the company that is holding your 1031 exchange money from stealing, as happened in Los Gatos a number of years ago?
Yeah, there was actually more than 10 defalcations out there. You've got to look at the different types of security that company has. So, for example, we're owned by Fidelity National Financial, a Fortune 300 company, and they provide a third-party guarantee of performance of up to $50 million per file. We have a current Fidelity bond of $100 million per file, a current bond for error and omission insurance of $30 million per file. The ones that went under, couple of things. Some of their bonds weren't current. They didn't have a parent company that was backing them up. It's an unregulated industry, so we don't take chances with the money. We only put it with organizations that are bigger than us, that have at least 10 billion in assets, and it's liquid. Some of the people that went out of business invested it. What happens when an investment goes bad? Well, the money's gone. How do you protect yourself? You have to ask those questions. And the biggest one I would ask is, what makes my money safe? Who backs you as a qualified intermediary? How long have you guys been around? How long have you been doing this? Those are important questions because it is an unregulated industry.
It's pretty scary, huh? Yeah.
Very scary.
So the next question is the annuity considered as qualified?
No.
Or 1031?
No, an annuity is not real property. It doesn't qualify. There are vehicles out there that are similar to that, but an annuity itself does not qualify.
Okay. I have a bunch of other questions. Let me see. Is there a tax implication on cashing out upon 1031 exchange?
Yes.
Yes. If you are to take money out at the close of escrow, there'd be the California state withholding, which really isn't a tax, but it's a down payment on what you would owe the state. But that is considered boot. And you would pay taxes on well, it depends when you receive the money. I mean, there was a lot of people that did exchanges last year just to get to this year so they could pay taxes in 2022. But you will be responsible for capital gains tax on any amount that you buy of less value or any cash that you keep. Whether or not you'll have other things that can offset or corresponding deductions that BIN can figure out for you, that's a different story. But yeah, that portion is subject to paying capital gains tax. In California, you're subject to the withholding on cash. Otherwise, you'll pay it when you file.
So you're talking about basically after you finish your 1031, you do a cash out refinance, and
that's not taxable. But if there's cash that you keep at the close of escrow of the property that you're selling, or cash that you don't use, that's taxable. But if you put all the money in, buy of equal or greater value, and then whenever the lender lets you refinance money out, that's not taxable.
Oh, so you can get cash out after the transaction closed.
After.
That's pretty smart.
Very smart.
Yeah. Siva was asking, all those rules are for federal taxes. Is it also the same for California tax calculations as well?
They go off of adjusted gross income, and they have different thresholds for California.
Okay. So he asked the similar questions. So if they bought an old home, demolish it, rebuild, and sell after 2 years, can they use that for 1031? And the answer is probably you have to rent it out for 1 to 2 years, depends on your CPA to be considered.
That would be the recommendation. And if it was a rental before, depending on how much of a remodel, there are some tax advisors that would say 1031 exchange it right away.
Okay. Another question, if the original investment property were purchased with all cash, shall the owner maybe refinance first, then do the 1031 to avoid having to use all the proceeds toward the purchase of a new property? Actually, I think you addressed that, right? Because your loan has to.
I addressed that on the other side. So that's a very good question. Number one, yeah, you'll still have to use all the proceeds. You'll have less, but you're going to have debt. You'll have to match that on the new property. If you are going to do something like that, I recommend that you refinance the property 6 months prior to listing the property so it is not construed as a step transaction. The IRS is more aggressive on refinances before than after. So before listing, 6 months prior, take the money out.
Cool. Okay. Alan asked, I'm sorry, when selling the property, when the husband and wife both held the title and 1031 changing to other property, want to add the children's name on the title for the exchange property, is that okay? Is that going to be?
That is okay, but you will own it with the children as tenants in common, and you want to make sure that the parents own equal or greater to what they sold. So just to make it easy, if they sold something for $1 million and they were going to buy a property with their children for $2 million, the parents would have to own at least 50% to hit their $1 million mark, and they would own it as tenants in common with the children. If the children are going to live in that property, and that happens quite often, make sure that there is a lease agreement with the parents, that the children pay the parents market value rent, or at least low market value rent for that ownership interest they have in the property.
That's good information. Yeah. There's another question. Can I buy a house that is still under construction now?
Yes, as long as it is completed within the 180-day time frame. Many people secure a replacement property, new construction. They get a deposit on it today. They haven't even listed their property, and they sell their property before the project is complete. As long as they can sell their property before the project is complete, they don't need a reverse exchange. And as long as the project is complete within the 180-day time frame, it works out nicely.
I remembered one of my clients who bought a new home as an exchange property, but they couldn't close on time. So actually that exchange failed. So
yeah, that's why, the contractor is going to say 3 months. What does that mean? That means 6 months. How long do you have? 6 months. Be very careful. You never know. You do know that you have 180 days to complete the transaction.
Okay. Deepak asked, don't you pay higher property tax on the newly acquired property with a 1031 exchange?
Yes, you do. And that is one of the cons of doing a 1031 exchange. You sold something where you were very low in property taxes, and now you're buying something and you potentially could have much higher property taxes.
But James talked about all different kinds of motives for doing this kind of transaction.
Well, in most scenarios, the cash flow that you're going to receive in the new asset is going to way outweigh the property tax increase. So at the end of the day, you're still going to make considerable profit. But yes, the property taxes would increase.
Yeah. So there's an earlier question I missed. Does 1031 have to be 1-to-1? We know the answer. You can actually sell one, buy multiple properties. Another question is, can they sell multiple properties in exchange to one property? I think that's more of timing, right?
That is very difficult to achieve in some markets, because when the first relinquished property closes escrow, that starts the clock. You want the second or third or however many properties they're going to sell to close within 45 days of that first one. And when the second property closes, you don't get another 45 days. That 45-day window is going to start when the first relinquished property closes escrow and will not restart when any subsequent properties close. So it's all about timing. It's all about planning. But yes, you can consolidate relinquished properties, multiple relinquished properties into one replacement property.
Okay. There's one question going back to the cash out. When you cash out after the 1031 exchange, is mortgage interest on the loan tax deductible expenses?
Ben, I believe yes, but jump in.
Mortgage, I'm sorry. Can you repeat again?
Okay, so if somebody finished their 1031 exchange and then they did a cash out for the new property, is that mortgage interest on the loan tax deductible? Is that a tax deductible expense?
Yeah, of course. Yes.
That's good.
As long as underlying, it's secured by the underlying property. Yes, they are deductible. Yes.
That's good. Okay, I'm just trying to collect all the questions here. Let me see. If I missed any questions, we're going to stay around a little bit. I know we're running over our timeline. Would you please tell us a little bit more about Delaware statutory trust and a foreigner, the tax and procedure in 1031 exchange is the same as a U.S. resident?
Well, I think we already went over the foreigner procedure. That 8288 form is absolutely critical, or else that 15% withholding will apply. I think that's the main difference between a foreigner and a U.S. citizen doing a 1031 exchange. In terms of the Delaware statutory trust, it's a very popular strategy for people that are tired of active management in real estate. It allows you to it allows you to buy a small fractional interest in a large commercial institutional property or properties. And basically all you do is get a monthly check and the broker dealer will take care of that property. The properties we see most often are large multifamily product, usually 400 units, something like that, going for anywhere between 50 to 80 million, or essential business, self-storage, medical office, Costco or something like that. Properties that are large, but you couldn't afford on your own, but you'll get into them, and for about a 5 to 7 year span, you'll absolutely do nothing but get paid. People ask me all the time, how do I get out of it? And is there risk in that? And what are the returns? I'd say the returns average anywhere after COVID. It probably went down from 5 to 7% to about 4 to 7%. Getting out of it is not easy because there is no true secondary market. You're in it to be in it as long as they want you to be in it. And that's usually about 5 to 7 years. And then when they sell, you can 1031 exchange into another DST or into just traditional real estate. It's very popular, especially with the elderly that have owned property and managed property for tons and tons of years and no longer want the day-to-day hassles and deal with any of that. And they're very happy with it, to be honest, because they're in something that has very low risk and it's stable.
Okay. And Eva asked, can I gain some more days to have a long escrow on the first property so we can have more than 45 days to locate the second
I think
house?
that's a great strategy. I was talking to somebody earlier today and they had control over the buyer. I would say, as long as you don't jeopardize the deal, it's always nice to get a regular escrow and have possible options to extend. And as long as they're not getting a loan, they might be willing to work with you because the timeframes don't start till the close of escrow. So it is awesome to be able to give yourself more time. And you know, it's awesome to already be in contract to buy something while you're still selling, like the new construction we were talking about, or a contingent sale that I mentioned earlier.
Yes, and Eva, yes, and to answer your second question, yes, you can look for the replacement property at the same time when you list your first property.
I would highly recommend doing that. You want to be very proactive and aggressive and be ready to strike. And usually when people are past their contingencies on the property that's being sold, they're out there making offers.
Yeah, exactly. There's a question for me. Cool. From Tito. When listing description says buyer to cooperate seller with 1031, then the first time home buyer usually get nervous and Google what 1031 means. And then once they know, they think they can negotiate harder. But so he's asking, what should a seller do not to disclose right away or counter after offer? Actually, I don't think it's going to cause any difference. I think they just think they can negotiate harder. But the reality is we have multiple offers and some other buyers would know this has nothing to do with anything else. So that's just a disclosure. So it's not going to affect the offer price. So don't worry about it. It's okay.
I'd agree with Coco, but unfortunately, some people are not going to believe because they're going to read too much on the internet. It's not necessary, to be honest, to put it on the MLS. You don't have to. What is necessary is to put language in the contract. And I would be careful on how I put that language. I would never say cooperate, to be honest. I would say participate or acknowledge, because when you say cooperate, sometimes people think, oh, what do I have to do? They do nothing. Exactly. The buyer does nothing. The seller's just doing an exchange.
It's just a disclosure, basically.
Yeah, it's just a disclosure. So I'd be careful with the wording. And if somebody is hesitant about that, you don't have to put it on the MLS, but you do need the language in the contract prior to the close.
Absolutely. And then I have people ask me, can I help to buy other states? The answer is actually yes, because I'm actually have network outside of the states, and we are going to have a seminar on remote reaches. So basically, we have a series of the investors seminars. Justin, if you can pull it up for the next few sessions. One of the sessions about talking about investing out of California. So of course, before that, I also have sessions about investing in the Bay Area, where to find lucrative investment opportunities. We're going to dig out some possibilities, some potentials, even in the Bay Area as well. So let's see whether we have more questions. Mary asked.
I saw a question about a shipping container come up. Unfortunately, that's personal property and will not qualify for a 1031 exchange. It has to be deemed real property. And I think that comes up a lot of the time with mobile homes as well. They don't qualify unless they're affixed to the foundation and has an APN number that it's deemed real property.
Okay.
So again, any questions like this, you guys can always reach out to me. I'm happy to help. It is a tricky code in some scenarios. We didn't get too much in depth on some of the things that can happen, but I think we gave you a good taste of ways to increase your real estate portfolio or just get into the investment nature of real estate. And if you've done that in California, most people are happy about the appreciation they've received.
Okay, thank you so much, James. I'm really happy that you came here today to share your time and wisdom with us. Our seminar is actually over time now. Now it's over. We will actually right now stop the recording. Before you all leave, please say thank you to James and wish each other a happy new year. You can also feel free to stay on to network with others, including James and me. I would love to hear about what your goals and resolutions are for this year. For everybody who is leaving, I'm Coco T.A.N, and I hope you have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coco.
Thank you, James.
Thank
and
you.
Coco.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
It's the first time I got to wear a dress shirt in a long time.
Which is good, right? Once in a
It-
while, right?
It is good. I used to wear it every day. I used to wear a
That's
suit.
say,
used to
well,
go
otherwise
outside.
it's in your closet.